Faith has long played an important role in presidential elections, but this year we've seen even starker lines drawn based on religious values. To learn more about our choices and how people of faith are making them, let's welcome Reverend Jorge Morales, Conference Minister of the Illinois Conference, United Church of Christ. We also welcome Tabassum Halim, Executive Director of the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago. And we welcome Dr. Myron McCoy, Senior Pastor at the First United Methodist Church, Chicago Temple. Hillary Clinton grew up in a United Methodist church. Donald Trump was baptized Presbyterian. He later attended Norman Vincent Peale's church, which people know for the power of positive thinking. How do you think that their faith is shaping their values right now in this campaign season?
Well, I think we're so reliant on the media and the press to get to know both of these individuals. I like to think that both of their values have been impacted in some way. However, I think there's some curiosity and doubts and questions regarding Donald Trump. I'm not sure that the Presbyterians have fully embraced him. I don't think that he's made clear exactly what or how his value has been impacted. Certainly for those of us who are more progressive, question whether or not he's been informed on the role of immigrants, that our own Savior was an immigrant, and I wonder if Jesus would have had any chance with Donald, he could have been sent back to be the victim of Pilate. On the other hand, Hillary seems to demonstrated that she grew up in the church, that as a child she was quite active. I would tend to think that the information we have would indicate that she has been influenced by Christianity and by the values of the United Methodist tradition and mainline Protestantism.
You're certainly hearing both candidates use faith as one of those sounding board issues because a lot of people certainly care about it a lot. And at the same time, you have these other candidates who are with them. You have Tim Kaine, Mike Pence, who have these very strong, unique faith backgrounds that they're out proclaiming as well on the campaign trail. How have you seen their faith influence their politics?
Well, Senator Kaine and Governor Pence have a different approach to blending religion with politics, from what I see. Senator Kaine is certainly devout in his beliefs, is sincere in what he believes, but he also draws a distinction between his position as an elected official and his personal faith. So that line between public policy and practicing your own faith is a very important line. And he himself does not believe in abortion, but he supports a woman's right to an abortion because it is the law of the land. So that is an important aspect of how one what one thinks of as their official duty. And whereas the governor, it seems like there's not as more of a distinct line between his own faith and what he wants to see in the public space. So even with refugees, and his stance on refugees was confusing at many levels. One is from, again, from a Christian point of view, the plight of the refugee is always something that is considered and as part of a strong part of one's faith, from what I know of Christianity, about helping the homeless and the disenfranchised. And yet he was opposing even the Archdiocese of Indianapolis against this whole concept of welcoming refugees. Not that he even had the power to do anything, because it's a federal decision. It's not a state decision. So those are the two distinct style of blending faith with dispensing of one's official duties. Those are the differences that I see.
And this is a unique campaign for a lot of reasons. I mean, you're hearing faith talked about almost every day on the trail, with a few weeks left now until Election Day. But you also have a ton of people who are registering now, who are younger, who are really getting into politics and parsing apart the candidates, and that's happening even in churches. You're hearing those conversations happen in mosques as well. Myron, what's the conversation like from where you are, from your pulpit, around politics and how people of faith are engaging?
Well, I think one of the things that's going on, people are not so much talking about the candidates right now as they are talking about the issues that are important to them. So when we talk about immigration, when we talk about deporting citizens, when we talk about mining, persons are looking at those in terms of faith issues, stewardship. And I think the media has done a pretty good job in, at least in terms of Secretary Clinton, in pretty much muddying her up over the years. So they're not, in some ways she's kind of not getting a full media attention that probably is warranted. She is a person of faith. She does attend church. She's always gone to church, whether she was in Arkansas or New York or Washington, D.C. She was a faithful member of a congregation and always engaged in working with different groups within the church, whether it's an election season or not.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely. Tabassum, what's it that been like inside of the Muslim community or your community inside of mosques? What are people saying right now? Because the rhetoric around Islam right now has been as nasty as it's ever been, and it doesn't seem to be softening. But how's the response in your community?
Well, there's definitely fear. There is sadness that almost all of the Muslims that immigrated to the United States were either escaping from religious persecution, believe it or not, with the dictators that they were escaping from, even though it was may have been a Muslim majority country, religious freedom, because sometimes religion and what religion dictates as far as standing up to aggressors or oppression, it undermines the authority of those despots that are in power. So many Muslims that immigrated to the United States were escaping that persecution and looking to the U.S. for religious freedom, economic freedom, and just a better life. And so there's a sadness that the beacon of the ideals that the world looks up to the United States for, that beacon is somehow diminishing to some extent. So there's a sadness there, fearfulness, maybe not as much for the adults, but certainly for their children. Immediate danger, as for also along with what's in the future for them. But it doesn't stop there, though. Fortunately, the Muslim community is a resilient community, and they have, because of their faith in God and faith in this country, we see many more American Muslims becoming civically engaged. There are a number of voter registration drives that have been going on. In fact, there are a number of voter registration drives that are scheduled for Eid tomorrow. So after Eid prayers, there will be people will get a chance to register to vote. So there's fear, but we're not being paralyzed by the fear. We're doing something about it.
It's encouraging to hear, not only in the Muslim community, which is not a monolith, obviously, but that a lot of communities that are on the wrong side of this rhetoric, of this fearful rhetoric, of this shameful rhetoric that we're hearing right now, are finding ways to still be involved. And that's what I'm hearing from you, and that's excellent. And it's a response, though, to this language and this dialogue that's happening that's really, I don't know, I kind of want to say it's scary to me. When I hear certain speeches and when I see the trajectory of campaigns right now, Jorge, why do you think Americans are so afraid right now?
I think that there's a backlash, in a sense. I think many other people who live in fear, and those who are talking about making America great again, are feeding an uninformed public, people who are gullible and who believe just about anything that can be said. One of the things that I think is helpful about a conversation about faith in the context of politics is that for many of us in the faith community, we had no idea that there was such a hate-filled sentiment against people of color. I think I personally felt that as a person of faith that we had come a lot further than we have indeed realized. I think the candidacy of particularly one of these candidates have really peeled the onion on the level of racism and hatred. And I think some of us are quite surprised that so many, particularly evangelicals, embrace a type of theology, faith perspective that seems to be pleased with rejection, hatred, the isolation of those who really need to be integrated and welcome into our society.
So let me ask this. When you hear that, and anybody can answer this, but do you feel like they should just take faith out of the conversation altogether if they're going to talk like that, or it feels like a hypocrisy to you? Like, how do you respond when you hear, whether it's progressive or evangelical or Christian or Muslim or anything, the kind of faith language that can sometimes also be isolating or alienating against people?
I can tell you that I personally enjoy it. I love to engage people in this conversation. I think these candidates, I mean, you got two mainline Protestants running for president, and their partners are two Catholics, and they're quite distinct. The two mainline Protestants are distinct, in one being somewhat progressive, and the other one being quite conservative and reactionary. And then on the other hand, the two Catholics. I mean, I'm really intrigued and I enjoy conversations about a Jesuit, because when I was going through theological school, the Jesuits were a great attraction to me. The theology of liberation, the commitment to social justice, the civil rights movement for people of the African American tradition in this country. And for some people, that offers some perspective, at least for dialogue, if not some level of hope. And of course, that one candidate embraces a very popular pope, who's also a Jesuit.
Myron, what I hear from Jorge is saying he's very interested, he's very intrigued, and maybe a lot of people are, but I also know a lot of people in my generation and a lot of young folks are not interested. They're kind of disconnected from both candidates and saying, I'm just going to disconnect from this process entirely. Why even vote? Why even connect faith to politics if it doesn't feel like they're living it? How might you respond to people from my generation and who you might even see who are experiencing that?
Well, I think we need to say to them that if they're dissatisfied with the way things are, that they need to be participants in creating a different future in spite of what they're hearing. And that would be true even in terms of how they might perceive it being connected with the church in some way. For me, when they can, especially one candidate, when they connect it with the church, it allows younger persons to see some of the hypocrisy of the faith, that we can overlook certain details about their faith stance with their policies that are promoted. It does not seem consistent. And so I would think that many young persons would be discouraged when they see they would have to say, I don't want to be a part of that faith community. If that's what they're thinking. When we look at, I was sharing with, just in conversation earlier today, looking at some of the displays of the inconsistency of what we said about President Obama when he was running. If he had been at a convention with a family from 3 different spouses, we would have looked at it differently. So there's not only faith issues, but inconsistencies of how we would look at different individuals versus it being a person of color, versus it being a majority white person, or versus it being perceived as a male or female. And I think younger people are looking for consistency.
Let me ask you this. The Pew Research Initiative shows that 80% of white evangelicals are voting for Donald Trump. Does that seem like an inconsistency to you, or are you surprised by that at all?
It seems like a major inconsistency for me, and I'm surprised but not surprised. And I think that there are some issues that they hold stronger than other issues that may be more important to me, such as peace, such as working with other folks, such as a woman's right to choose, such as how we, whether we put money into early childhood education or whether money goes for more prisons. I think there's just a total inconsistency when they say that they're pro-life or for people.
So, Bossman, I'm going to let you have the last word here. This has been one of the craziest election seasons in American history and covered more by media than ever before. What's your hope for this country after the election season is over?
I do hope that no matter who gets elected, that we all understand that democracy is not a spectator sport. We, whether we, as Americans, want the responsibility or not, we are an example of a democracy that does work. We're a nation of immigrants with diverse, a spectrum of color, languages, religions. We're an experiment that many of us feel does work, as long as we all work at it. It does not work by itself. And if our country fails at any level, then what hope do the rest of the world have? What hope do they have in believing that their society can do better as far as democratic principles? So no matter who is elected, the hope is that more of us take our democracy seriously and our responsibilities as citizens seriously.
It works if you work at it.
Yes.
I like that. And we're working at it as a nation right now. We're working on our faith right now. And thank you all for being here today. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm Julian DeShazier for Different Drummers in the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.